And I'm joined now by Dr Azar Jammine. He's Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix. Azar, thank you so much for joining us. I think you might have heard the reporting from Ronald in the Eastern Cape and just how desperate times are. Do you think that government should be doing more? I mean, we've heard some of the suggestions from the DA, zero rating for VAT, more items to make it easier for the very poor, dealing with fuel prices, trying to keep a handle on the increasing fuel prices. Do you think government needs to be doing more?
Well, government basically could do more by reducing the levels of corruption that would then pave the way for more funds to be made available for general social upliftment, including increasing social grants. The fact that the government is short of funds right now is a direct result of a decade or more of state capture and corruption that has denuded the coffers of public entities to actually do the work that they're supposed to in terms of delivering services. Furthermore, the fiscal management of the country is now looking fairly precarious in light of there being insufficient funds to provide for certain basic conditions, such as increases in public servants' wages and extension of the social relief for distress grant. And the markets are getting terribly concerned that the government is running out of money, also to help bail out SOEs. And the result has been a tanking of the rand's exchange rate. And that has been a major contributor towards the escalation of inflation, or rather the nature of inflation remaining higher than might otherwise have been the case. And that is directly attributable to government's economic management.
Yeah. Do you think that now would be the time to, given that context, for government to do things specifically to help the very poor, such as zero rate certain items and other interventions?
Unfortunately, the government doesn't have the means to do so right now. Let it somehow induce growth enhancing economic strategies, get rid of load shedding, ease the logistical constraints on transporting goods to and from the country's ports in order to enable exports to increase. Get infrastructural investment going. That has been stymied by criminal activity that has been sabotaging the ability to actually embark upon infrastructural investment. All those factors have been constraining economic growth. That is what the government needs to concentrate on. Trying to find short-term solutions by zero rating VAT or doing this or that to limit fuel price increases, I think is just attacking the symptom rather than the fundamental cause of the malaise that we face.
You mentioned the fiscal concern, which of course is the big picture around how our money is being spent and how much debt is racking up for our government. But we're also facing these pressures that are coming at us every month, a second lot of increases on the price of fuel. Now, even eggs, the prices are going to go up because there's so few eggs. And it seems like such a small thing, but the reality is it's another sign of a massive pressure on our economy and on our agriculture sector. Do you foresee things getting worse in the coming months? And I'm thinking specifically of the consumer experience.
For the consumer's experience in the coming months will get tighter. Interest rates have risen by nearly 5% over the last 2 years, and employment has not picked up the way it ought to have, and economic growth is coming under pressure. We see all the indicators that consumer spending is now starting to take strain. For several years through the period of state capture, consumption held up. It was investment that was in decline. The good news is that investment is showing some minimal signs of actually starting to pick up momentum, but the rise in interest rates to quell inflationary pressures has now resulted in consumers starting to take more strain than ever before. But it's very difficult to try and remedy that by, zero rating this. The next thing is the government may well need to raise the rate of VAT to fund a lot of its expenditure on social services. At the end of the day, that's a zero-sum game, because you increase taxes and you get lower growth, which in turn harms government revenue, which in turn forces the government to borrow still more. And one of the big constraints that we face right now is that the amount that government spends in purely paying interest on the loans that it has incurred over the last decade is now nearly 20% of government revenue. That money could be so readily spent on doing precisely the kind of providing precisely the kind of assistance that you're alluding to help consumers. We are paying the price for mismanagement over the last 15 years.
There's a lot of talk at the moment, and this came around a few years ago, but now increasingly so. We know that government's talking austerity. They're really concerned. Treasury is really concerned. But there's talk of this so-called fiscal cliff and whether we're at a tipping point. Talk to me about what this fiscal cliff is, what this tipping point is, and how close you believe we might be to it.
I've alluded to an element of it by talking about the amount of interest that government is now spending on servicing its public debt. I think people are maybe too alarmist in terms of a fiscal cliff that we're about to fall over and crash. I think it's a gradual process. We've seen part of it already in the form of the plunge in the rand from 13, 14 to the dollar to over 19 to the dollar at present over the past year, which is a source of massive inflationary pressure. The government is going to have to find a way. The ANC has come out with all sorts of populist policies, such as national health insurance schemes, such as extending the social relief for distress grant, many of which are very commendable. But where's the money going to come from? It's already spending 20% of tax revenue simply paying interest on the debts it's already got. Now, there are many within the ruling party who say, borrow still more. Now, that is the recipe for going over the fiscal cliff. And eventually what happens is a government runs out of cash to pay its way, and so it starts printing the money. And the next thing you have is inflation rocketing to not only 20%, but often to hundreds of percent. And who loses most in such circumstances? Well, the entire country does, but the rich are able to invest in shares and property and other forms of inflation hedges. The poor don't have a means of keeping pace with those price increases, and they suffer proportionately far more in such an environment. So we need people to start looking further ahead than just to the next few months.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us this evening. That was Dr. Azar Jammine. He's Director and Chief Economist at Econometrix.